The Second Amendment, D.C. versus Heller, and McDonald versus Chicago go together. McDonald versus Chicago is the required AP government Supreme Court case, not D.C. versus Heller, but they kind of go hand in hand. In the District of Columbia, they had a handgun ban in D.C. where citizens did not. They basically, if they owned a handgun, they had to keep it in their house and they had to take it apart, and they couldn't have the bullets in it, and they had strict regulations with handguns because in DC there's a lot of crime. They had a lot of cops did not like handguns, and they didn't like people to have them, and it was a very restrictive handgun ban. And actually the person that brought the case was a cop, or he might have been a retired policeman, but he knew how to handle a gun, and he felt that this violated his Second Amendment rights. So this case, DC versus Heller in 2008, citizens did have a right to bear arms, and it was an individual liberty. It wasn't just based on the militia. It had nothing to do with the militia. It actually is the first case that actually gave citizens the right to bear arms in the Supreme Court. Now, Chicago, another city with a problem with handguns and crime, required all gun owners to register their guns, yet the city refused to allow citizens to register handguns, creating an effective ban. So Otis McDonald said the ban rendered him without self-defense in a crime-ridden neighborhood, and the Second Amendment should have prevented this vulnerability. So this was a case that actually was selective incorporation. It incorporated the Second Amendment to apply to the states. The court applied the Second Amendment to the states for the first time. So first you have D.C. versus Heller, which gives people and individuals the right to bear arms, and then McDonald versus Chicago incorporated that to include states had to follow the Supreme Court case D.C. versus Heller. So the issue was, does the Second Amendment apply to the states because it is incorporated by the 14th Amendment's due process and privilege immunity clauses? The decision was yes. The court ruled that the 14th Amendment makes the right to keep and bear arms for the purpose of self-defense applicable to the states. Such rights are fundamental to the nation's scheme of ordered liberty and deeply rooted in the nation's history and traditions. This was McDonald versus Chicago, 2010. It's a landmark Supreme Court case. It uses basically the 14th Amendment to selectively incorporate the right to bear arms to states and not just the national government. There'll be a video on McDonald versus Chicago. Make sure you understand this case and understand the history of the Second Amendment.